Not too long ago, I put out a video showcasing a pack of 12 3D driving games for the Commodore 64, featuring titles using both faux 3D vanishing point visuals alongside some proper 3D. It really showed that, contrary to the opinions of the internet, the humble breadbin was more than capable when in the right hands. But there's more to driving games than just the third dimension, and knowing the C64's sprite and character capabilities, there were also plenty of competition amongst overhead driving games as well. Which now brings me to present another roundup, showing 12 of them which both use the Commodore 64's capabilities well, but are also good fun to play. And so, time to drop the starter's flag once again. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. The first game out of the pack is F1 GP Circuits, developed by Magnetica and published by Idea in 1991. If any game here was described by its title, it's certainly this one. You join one of 4 F1 racing teams, each offering a particular advantage over their rivals. For every race in the season, you'll first run a qualifying lap to determine your place on the grid. Then, it's time to kick off the race, and things do get interesting here. And not just from the overhead view. Firstly, it's that the course only scrolls vertically. This does simplify the navigation of the course, though you'll still find there's plenty of challenge in overtaking your opponents. Secondly is the damage model, which is surprisingly involved, as your car takes wear and tear during the race. You'll eventually need to repair it, and this requires you to pick what you want the crew to repair before you can dive back onto the track. Performing well here is critical to earn enough points to reach the later races of the season, but it's quite fun in mastering the thrills of the circuit to being able to do this. What isn't fun though is the amount of loading. Whilst the game is well presented, the number of intermission screens presented between races can truly be distracting. And that's on the disc version of the game. I can't imagine what it would be like for the tape release. Despite that, F1 GP Circuits is certainly worth your time to check out. Next up is Hot Rod, a conversion of Sega's 1988 arcade title, converted to the C64 by Ash and Dave, and published by Activision. Hot Rod has you, and optionally a friend, racing through point-to-point courses, aiming to reach the end without running out of fuel. The courses are filled with plenty of hazards, enough to throw you off course when things go wrong. Not only that, if a hapless player is scrolled off the screen, they'll be given a fuel penalty as they're reunited with the pack. Alongside the hazards, you'll also find pickups. Most of these are for bonus points, though you'll also encounter some which can add extra fuel to your fuel tank. Between races, you'll be able to use your winnings to install car upgrades. All of these do help in some way for the races ahead. It certainly carries its arcade roots heavily on its sleeve, possibly to its detriment. Though if you could bring a friend along for the ride, it can be genuinely thrilling navigating these courses and trying to outwit each other. The final part of the package is the sublime presentation, along with the great Maniacs of Noise soundtrack, all of which goes a long way to making this one a great game to sit back and enjoy. If there's a pick for the oldest game in this field, it's Commodore's very own Le Mans, developed by HAL Laboratory. Yes, that HAL Laboratory. Le Mans has you taking to the track and aiming to get the highest score possible when racing against the clock. You'll start out with 60 seconds, earning an extra 60 for every 20,000 points you score. You'll race over a variety of conditions, from straight roads to winding sections and into darkened tunnels where your headlights are your only saving grace against the rivals on track. You'll also encounter icy roads where your steering becomes sluggish, alongside tricky bridges requiring very precise movements to avoid your rivals. Sure, it all sounds relatively straightforward, but the real unique selling point is that Le Mans requires you to have a set of paddles. Though hunting a working set of them down isn't the easiest thing in the world, it goes a long, long way to offering a genuinely unique experience as a result, particularly for being one of the few driving games to support them, and support them well. Keeping with the early Commodore 64 vibe, and we've got Motor Mania, published by UMI. Motor Mania is a game all about driving for score. Sure, that might make it sound rather simplistic, but if anything, you can certainly get into the zone here and get seriously engrossed in trying to rack up that high score. Things start off sedate with a wide road and sparse hazards to avoid. You'll encounter other drivers to be passed alongside road debris, which can cause damage to your tyres if you're not careful. Then there's the falling rocks and treacherous dirt roads to navigate, plus the junctions, which may or may not have ambulances crossing. Obviously, you're going to need to hit the brakes to avoid crashing into those when they do come up. The final hazard is of course your fuel. As you drive, this will slowly wear down, and when it starts to get low, you'll need to pull into a conveniently located gas station in order to refuel. Motor Mania isn't the most technically accomplished pick of those I'm featuring here, but it could be considered from the nostalgia angle, though there are a lot of things it really manages to do right. From its tight controls to the pick up and play nature of its mechanics, it's generally one which can be great fun to go back to drive and relax to. This one is probably controversial, as whilst you could say Pitstop is a vanishing point racer, it's also valid to consider it an overhead one, particularly from its view, as though it is tilted to partially simulate the perspective of the former, it also doesn't offer enough of a viewing distance ahead of your car, as you find with many titles of the latter. As with its sequel, which we covered in the previous video, Pitstop is certainly a thrilling racing experience. Even more, the focus is on setting the fastest race time, especially with its multiplayer mode, as unlike the second game, players now take it in turns to race the track, with the fastest time earning the prize at the end. The real selling point once again is the pit stops. As you pull in when needed, you then command a team to refuel your car and switch out the tyres in order to get back on the track as fast as possible. Mastering these and learning to conserve your tyres when on the track is really how a driver can take the top spot. With a set of 6 courses to race on, there is plenty of racing fun for sure. Especially as you can have an event on a single course, the mini circuit which is a set of 3, or the full grand circuit of 6. It's another pick for some solid arcade style fun, especially if you're after something to challenge some friends with for sure. If there's a Commodore 64 driving game which offers the literal kitchen sink of goodies, it's certainly got to be EA's Racing Destruction set. Its driving model may be different. Whilst you've got free control of your speed, instead of freely turning around the course, you change lanes much like a slot car. It certainly feels different to everything else out there, but don't let it fool you. You will need to be shifting lanes quite frequently to avoid traffic and get the best racing line. Then you dive into the game's options. To start with, there's a literal smorgasbord of tracks on offer. 50 are included with the game, and you even get a track editor to create your own. From there, you could alter the graphic sets, the gravity, which could really mess things up if you're not careful, alongside plenty of other rules. Finally, the cars. You've got a good selection of those on offer, ranging from serious racing vehicles to slightly more unconventional ones, like a Lunar Rover. Each can be tuned with different engines, alongside adding armour, crushers, and yes, even weapons into the mix. That's right, weapons. And that's the reason why this is a racing destruction set, and not a racing construction set. With weapons enabled, it's not just about being first over the line, it's also about surviving against your rival as well. That should ideally be a friend, but if you don't have one handy, the AI can offer a solid challenge, particularly when cranked up to expert mode and given the same car as you. As fun as the racing mechanics are, the customization does mean you'll need to be patient with this one. Even on disc, there is a substantial amount of loading involved, and though also released on tape, it isn't cut down at all, and that results in some of the longest waiting around known to humanity. Thankfully though, in modern times, you can enjoy it even more with a great cracked release which can be flashed onto an easy flash card, and that eliminates most of the tedious waiting. Rallycross Simulator is another Codemasters simulator which, well, isn't quite a simulator, but it's a fun enough run regardless. Over a series of 5 courses, your goal is to try to complete a number of laps before running out of time. Not only is the clock your enemy here, but you'll also need to keep track of your car's condition, specifically watching its fuel, oil, and water levels. When these run low, you'll have to dive into the pits to replenish them. Alongside that, you could also purchase upgrades which can go towards enhancing your car's performance during the races. The courses themselves offer plenty of challenges to negotiate, and this is amplified from a few particular elements. Firstly, the control scheme, as is one of those games where you push the joystick in a direction you want the car to go. This does have the effect of restricting you to only being able to drive in 8 directions, meaning things do get fiddly when negotiating some of the tighter corners, and the complex areas of each course. Then, there's the penalty involved from crashing. Not only do you lose time, as you'd expect, but you'll also lose points. The very same points you'll use to buy additional fuel, oil, and water. Yes, which means if you're not the cleanest of drivers, it can be very easy to crash enough times to burn through your points and prematurely end your racing career. Though don't let that dissuade you, as there is a great game here, once you can get to grips with the control scheme. Another oldie is up next, with John Anderson's Rally Speedway, originally published by Adventure International for the Atari 8-bits, with this Commodore 64 one being published by Commodore themselves. Rally Speedway is probably the purest of the titles featured in this video, as there's no championships or laps to deal with here. It's really just a hot lapping experience around a single course, either by yourself or against a friend. A lot of the fun here is in tweaking the car's behaviour. It might not be as flexible as, say, Racing Destruction set, but you do get to set both the maximum speed, as well as whether or not you can crash into the scenery. Setting this could really be fun, either to just zoom about without a care in the world, or to really test your driving mettle, and not just to see that animation of your poor driver escaping their wrecked car. You've also got a built-in course editor to hand, which allows you to create your own tracks as well, though the downside is that you can only have a single track in memory at a time. Whilst the time attack nature of things may mean it could get boring quickly for some, Rally Speedway is the kind of game which can truly be great fun, especially if you're open to messing about with that track editor, bringing some friends in, and creating some truly chaotic experiences. And now for Retro Talk, the first and only motorcycle racing game included here. The goal is to win simply by beating the computer riders across each of the stages included in the game. Unsurprisingly, it's not just for a solo player, as you could race against a friend as well, though the split screen layout in use is certainly a little too cramped, at least compared with other head-to-head games. Your bike is certainly not as fragile as you'd expect. You can crash into walls a few times before the proverbial explosion, which does lead to you losing plenty of time as you need to reposition yourself and could really spoil your day, alongside the other hazards which will simply spin you about. Dotted around each course are several fuel stops. Whilst you will need to stop by on occasion to top up your bike's fuel supply, but they'll also help repair the damage a careless rider will have accumulated. Thankfully, your bike also carries some nitro boosts to help close the gap against your rivals. Along with that, there's also the customary golden spanners you'll collect, located on the track, which can be traded in for upgrades between races. Now, Retro Talk may carry some shades of familiarity, because as it turns out, it's a reworked version of an earlier title called Turbo Kart Racer, originally published by players. The reworking here is applied to the visuals, making it look much brighter, and the on-screen map is far more useful to boot. It also plays a little fairer than Turbo Kart Racer, particularly as your opponents are less aggressive when starting out, which helps give the player a fair shot at success. All of this means it's really a package that deserves a little more love than it gets online. Compared with other forms of motorsport in this roundup, Formula 1 really hasn't been seen all that much, but with Slicks, the score has been evened up just a bit. This is one many would have missed, coming out in late 1992, developed once again by Ash and Dave under their digital design label, and published by Codemasters. The long-term goal in Slicks is to win the Drivers' Championship, as you race across versions of 6 real-life courses. The catch is that you start out in a relatively slow car, so doing it in your first season is not that likely at all. That's where Slicks' most unique mechanic comes into play. Once you finish the qualifying lap for each course, you've got the opportunity to challenge another driver. If you beat them, you'll switch teams and take their faster car. The reverse can apply to you, however, being challenged by a rival in a slower car, and if you mess it up, you'll go down a team as a result. What this means is that you really, and I mean really, need to know how to drive these beasts well, particularly as you'll want to keep yourself to the racing line to get a better quartering advantage over your faster rival, or to take the straights better than your slower ones. The presentation here is top notch, the controls tight, and the visuals take real advantage of what the Commodore 64 has to offer. The final piece in Slicks' package is the challenging 2-player mode. You'll race with a friend aiming to scroll each other off the screen in a manner similar to the Micro Machines series. Frankly, it's one of the best races on the C64. Best without a doubt. Stalker is another arcade conversion, and could certainly be considered one of the more obscure ones, having only been released in the US. Which is apt really, as it's a game about racing across the US of A. You'll be dodging traffic and aiming to keep the speed up to get as far as possible before you run out of gas. There's also shortcuts to race down and police to avoid. He'll give you a ticket, costing you valuable points at the end of the game. This type of race is incredibly unique for overhead racing games, and it certainly plays like it, especially as the road ahead is laid out on a screen-by-screen basis. It means you'll be focusing on just clearing out each section as fast as you can, whether by following the road, or by taking any shortcut you can find, including over strips of grass. Like with Rallycross Simulator, the controls are somewhat unconventional, pushing the joystick to turn and drive in the given direction. It can be a bit clunky, especially without the rotational smoothness the arcade original offered, but considering the frenetic pace, I think it can be excused. Stalker is certainly not an all-time classic, but it's one which can certainly get you engrossed in its mechanics, should you give it a go. The final game in this roundup is the Commodore 64 conversion of Magnetic Fields' Supercars, published by Gremlin. You'll take to a series of tracks aiming to work your way through the classes, whilst using your prize winnings to upgrade your car and add on some major upgrades. Things may start out sedate as you'll only race a few opponents on some short courses, but you'll soon see some serious competition, along with some twisty and devious courses as you progress through each class. There's plenty of flexibility on offer, as you can race these 9 courses in any order, which can have both benefits and setbacks for the unwary player. Like having to negotiate a big pack of rivals, whilst racing a very short track. Upgrading your car offers the usual assortment of speed and acceleration improvements, but there's also a system to automatically correct your direction after a spin, which can be seriously handy, particularly with later races introducing hazards onto the track. Then there's the weapons. You can fit a single missile to the front and rear of your car. Finding the right time to use them when on the track can be a tough matter, but when used right, you'll easily take an opponent out of the running, who might even end up being an obstacle for your rivals. Supercars is quite a solid conversion to the C64, with the only real mechanic missing being the ability to haggle with the dealer when trying to buy a new car. It's sorely missed, but it's one which doesn't really break the proceedings that much, making it still quite a joy to play. So there we have it, a field of 12 overhead driving and racing games for the Commodore 64. When deciding to work on this video, I sat down with a lot of these games, as unsurprisingly, there were a stupendous number of them released for the humble breadbit. There were plenty I found which were nicely presented, but just weren't that much fun to play. I'm sure I could have focused on a smaller set here, but as you'd expect from me and this channel, showing off some of the lesser known ones is truly important to me. There certainly were a few surprises indeed, especially around F1 GP circuits, Retro Talk and Stalker. These three I wasn't really that familiar with before checking them out, and are certainly ones I now want to sit down with some more. As with the previous video on the 3D driving games, I'm sure there are some I've missed here, so if you've got a favourite I didn't cover, why not drop it in the comments below. Having covered both 3D driving games and now overhead ones, there's just a matter of preparing a roundup of some single screen racing games as well, so do keep an eye out for that in the coming weeks. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, why not leave a thumbs up on the video, alongside sharing it with any like-minded folk you know. It really helps get it out there and helps make the channel a little more viable. If you want to help the channel, consider subscribing if you haven't already, or even more importantly, if you want to support what I do, you can access my Patreon feed where you get early peeks and other bits and pieces. But most importantly, thank you for taking the time out to enjoy another voyage beyond the scanlines.